6:12 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. A police precinct office transformed into an evidence vault of betrayal. Chief of police, a Somali American with 17 years of service, credentials stacked higher than most, and a reputation that once commanded respect across 3 counties. Federal authorities raided his office, exposing documents tied to criminal networks spanning state lines. 37 arrests incoming, 2 deportations confirmed. This is what happens when authority becomes accomplice. The precinct sits on the east side of the city, a neighborhood where immigrant communities built new lives, where trust in law enforcement was hard-won over decades. The police chief arrived in 2007, rose through the ranks with commendations for community engagement, bilingual outreach programs, and a public image carefully crafted around bridge building between cultures. Press conferences showed a leader. Award ceremonies showed a symbol of integration success. But federal investigators had been watching. Not the public ceremonies, not the speeches about unity. They watched the patterns no camera could capture. Financial transactions that defied explanation. Case files that disappeared before prosecution. Witnesses who went silent after conversations in that very office. The fortress was not made of concrete and steel. It was made of access, authority, and the assumption that no one would question a decorated officer. Like and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will reveal how positions of power can become shields for the very crimes they're sworn to prevent. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer the truth became. Corruption did not announce itself with headlines. It seeped in quietly, patiently, through relationships that looked legitimate on the surface. The chief possessed something invaluable to criminal organizations: real-time access to investigative databases, warrant schedules, informant identities, and interagency communication. Knowledge that could mean the difference between arrest and escape, between conviction and dismissal. Federal authorities allege the chief formed alliances with networks operating drug distribution channels, human trafficking routes, and document forgery operations serving multiple criminal enterprises. The deal was elegant in its simplicity: information for money, warning for protection, interference for immunity. But deals with criminals are never contained. They metastasize. What began as occasional tips allegedly evolved into systematic sabotage of law enforcement operations. Cases built over months collapsed days before raids. Evidence vanished from storage. Witnesses recanted testimony after unexplained meetings. Consequences were not abstract. Federal documents allegedly reveal connections to operations that moved narcotics through corridors the chief had sworn to protect, contributing to distribution networks that flooded communities with fentanyl-laced substances. The human cost. A documented spike in overdose deaths in neighborhoods the precinct served, families destroyed, futures erased. This was not opportunistic crime, it was infrastructure. What federal agents allegedly discovered went beyond individual corruption. They found systematic organization. The chief's office became a nerve center, not for public safety, but for criminal coordination. Documents allegedly contained coded communication systems, encrypted messaging channels linked to known trafficking organizations, and detailed schedules of federal operations obtained through law enforcement databases. The security surrounding this operation was deliberate. Access to certain files required credentials few possessed. Meetings occurred in locations without surveillance. Conversations happened on devices registered to third parties. The financial scale tells its own story. Federal financial forensics allegedly traced over $2.3 million in unexplained deposits across multiple accounts, property acquisitions that defied his official salary, cash transfers structured to avoid reporting thresholds, and investment patterns consistent with money laundering operations. This was not a dirty cop taking bribes. This was alleged infrastructure supporting a parallel operation where badge and criminal enterprise functioned as one. Documents seized during the raid allegedly revealed something more disturbing: a network of coordination, names of other officials, contact information for individuals in neighboring jurisdictions, evidence suggesting this was not isolated corruption, but nodes in a broader system of compromise, extending beyond a single precinct, a single city. The operation did not begin with press releases. It began in the dark. 5:47 a.m. Federal agents from the FBI and ICE coordinated with state law enforcement, executed warrants simultaneously across multiple locations. 42 agents deployed to the precinct alone. The breach was tactical, methodical, designed to prevent destruction of evidence. No warnings, no negotiations. Just the sound of doors opening under the authority of federal warrants. The chief was present. According to reports, he did not resist. He did not speak. He watched as agents moved through the office with the precision of investigators who had planned every step for months. File cabinets opened, computers seized, documents photographed in place before removal. Every piece of evidence cataloged with the understanding that defense attorneys would scrutinize every procedure. The operation lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. What agents found exceeded even the worst suspicions their investigation had generated. What lay hidden within that office painted a portrait of systematic betrayal. Federal authorities allegedly seized hundreds of documents, case files marked for dismissal, witness statements with annotations indicating who could be pressured, surveillance reports on ongoing federal operations, and lists that made seasoned investigators pause. Names of confidential informants, some of whom had subsequently disappeared or recanted testimony under suspicious circumstances. Financial records filled evidence boxes. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, real estate documents, cash counting records showing amounts incompatible with legitimate income. But the most damaging discovery was digital. Encrypted communications allegedly linking the chief directly to individuals under federal investigation for trafficking operations, messages discussing case details only someone with database access could know, and warnings sent hours before scheduled raids that subsequently found empty locations. The forensic analysis would take months, but the immediate picture was clear. This office had functioned as an intelligence hub for criminal operations while simultaneously holding the public trust of a community that desperately needed legitimate law enforcement. This raid was not an ending. It was the moment the investigation shifted from surveillance to action. Federal warrants were executed simultaneously at 17 locations across 2 states. Residences of individuals connected to the network. Business fronts allegedly used for money laundering. Storage facilities containing additional evidence. The scope revealed how deeply the alleged corruption had embedded itself within systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of compromise. At 3 locations, agents encountered resistance, not from the subjects, but from associates who had been warned, not with violence, but with destruction. Documents burned, hard drives smashed, evidence scattered. Federal preparation anticipated this. Cloud backups had already been secured. Surveillance had documented evidence locations before warrants were served. The desperation of the cleanup attempt only confirmed the value of what investigators had found. The cumulative seizure numbers painted a staggering picture. Over $847,000 in cash, 43 firearms, including weapons modified for fully automatic fire, 17 vehicles, including luxury models purchased with untraceable funds, and most critically, digital evidence comprising thousands of messages, financial transactions, and communications that would take forensic analysts months to fully decode. Federal forensic accountants began the painstaking work of connecting money to crimes, transactions to trafficking, and payments to protection. What they allegedly uncovered was a financial ecosystem designed around one principle: convert criminal proceeds into apparent legitimacy. Over $2.3 million in unexplained income flowing through accounts tied to the chief and associated individuals. Property purchases structured through shell companies. Investment patterns consistent with money laundering through legitimate businesses. Cash deposits timed to avoid triggering reporting requirements that would have flagged the transactions for review. But the investigation extended beyond money. Communication analysis allegedly revealed a pattern of case interference spanning years. 41 criminal investigations potentially compromised by information leaks. 17 cases dismissed due to evidence problems that now appeared deliberate. 8 confidential informants who had either disappeared or refused further cooperation after their identities were allegedly exposed through unauthorized database access. The human cost statistics were devastating. In the neighborhoods served by the precinct, overdose deaths had increased by 29% over a 3-year period. The same period, federal investigators believed the chief was actively compromising narcotics investigations. Families destroyed not just by the drugs that flooded their streets, but by the protection those drugs received from someone wearing a badge. This was not a failure of enforcement. It was a failure of integrity, at the point where integrity mattered most. The reckoning came without spectacle. The chief faces federal charges: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, obstruction of justice, bribery, honest services fraud, and unauthorized access to law enforcement databases. If convicted, the potential sentence exceeds 30 years in federal prison. But he is not alone. 37 additional arrests are incoming, targeting individuals allegedly connected to the network, associates who facilitated the operation, recipients of leaked information, and co-conspirators in the alleged protection scheme. 2 deportations are confirmed. Individuals in the United States whose immigration status was contingent on lawful behavior, whose alleged participation in this network triggered removal proceedings that federal authorities fast-tracked given the severity of the alleged crimes. The total damage extends beyond individual charges. Communities that needed legitimate law enforcement instead received selective protection based on criminal payment. Trust that takes generations to build shattered by one individual's alleged betrayal. Families who lost loved ones to overdoses, to violence that flourished under the protection this network allegedly provided. Internal reactions within law enforcement agencies were swift. The FBI issued statements emphasizing that no position grants immunity from prosecution, that badges do not shield criminals, that the majority of law enforcement professionals serve honorably. But words could not erase the damage done. Criminal organizations that relied on the chief's alleged protection scrambled to adapt. Federal pressure increased as the network lost its inside source. Arrests accelerated. Operations collapsed. The vacuum his alleged betrayal created was filled not with another corrupt official, but with investigators determined to prove that systems could be cleaned, that accountability was not just rhetoric. This story does not end with arrests or deportations or damaged networks. It ends with a question every community must answer. What happens when the people sworn to protect become the very threat protection was meant to stop? The chief allegedly did not wear the mask of a criminal. He wore the uniform of authority. He did not operate in shadows. He operated from a desk where citizens came for help. Corruption wears the face of respectability. It speaks the language of service. It hides behind credentials and commendations and years of apparent dedication. But it cannot hide forever from investigators willing to look past the facade, to follow evidence wherever it leads, to accept that badges do not grant immunity from justice. The reforms implemented in the aftermath address symptoms: enhanced oversight, regular audits, restricted database access, mandatory rotation of sensitive assignments. But systems are only as strong as the individuals who operate them. And individuals are only as trustworthy as their commitment to principles over profit, duty over deals, communities over criminals. There is hope in accountability, in the reality that federal agents did not look away from corruption because it wore a uniform, in the fact that 37 arrests are incoming despite the complexity of the alleged network, in the knowledge that 2 deportations send a message that immigration status offers no protection for those who betray the trust required to live in communities they allegedly exploited. Justice is not a guarantee. It is a responsibility. A responsibility fulfilled not through speeches or policies, but through the hard work of investigators who spend months building cases, of prosecutors who charge powerful individuals, of judges who ensure that no badge places anyone above the law. This raid was not an ending. It was a reminder that trust without oversight becomes vulnerability, that power without accountability becomes tyranny, that badges can be shields for criminals or tools for justice, but never both. No position is above the law. No betrayal is too complex to unravel. No corruption is too protected to prosecute. And in a system that still functions, the truth matters more than any individual who forgot it.